In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a watercolor sunset, and we are going to be using a wet on wet technique to create a wash, but we're going to do it in the tones of a sunset or a sunrise. One thing I want to mention before I get started is I've noticed a few comments on my YouTube about, how do I say this in the nicest way, that I'm doing watercolor wrong. And while I appreciate the comments, I just want to say that this is the way that I choose to do watercolor, and if that's not the way that you choose to do it, that's totally fine. But I know a lot of people are here because they want to learn from me. So I'm showing you how I do watercolor painting, and I just want to remind the people that keep leaving me comments like that, art is about being a rebel, and it's about throwing out the rule book. So I will show you basic ways and techniques from watercolor, but I also infuse my own techniques into it, and that's just that. So I won't be responding to comments telling me I'm doing watercolor wrong, because this is art and I like to have a lot of freedom in my art. I'm showing you how I do art. It might not be the way that somebody else does watercolor, and that is totally fine. That's what makes watercolor so amazing. So let's get started. Now that I've got that out of the way. A couple of things that we're going to be using here today is, if you guys have painted with me before, you know I like to use 2 water cups. I have one for cool tones and one for warm tones. Also, for washes, I like to use, this is literally called a wash brush. This is the pigeon letters, but you can use any kind of flat brush like this, just something that you can cover a lot of ground with on your paper. Of course, we're gonna need watercolor paint. I'm using 4 colors today. You don't have to use 4 colors, but I'm going to share the ones that I'm using with you because I do get comments that you want to know what colors I'm using sometimes. This one is Blue Royal from Aquarelle. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And then all the other ones are Winsor and Newton. Lemon Yellow Deep. I might use a little bit of Indian Yellow as well from Winsor and Newton. Opera Rose and Cerulean Blue. Whenever we're creating a watercolor wash, we're going to be using a lot of water on our paper. And I really recommend using a watercolor block if you can for that, because your paper is going to have to soak in a lot of water. And if you're using a loose sheet of paper, it can really warp it. Now, if you don't have a choice, you don't have a watercolor block, make sure you tape your paper down. I recommend using a masking tape like this that comes off of your paper easily and isn't going to ruin it. If you are just using a piece of watercolor paper that's not attached to a block, please tape your paper down really, really well to your surface. You might still get some lumps and bumps in your paper, but that's kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to watercolor painting, especially washes, because we're using so much water. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to grab our brush, so a flat, bigger brush. If you don't have one this big, one like this, or even a round brush can work, but this is really going to give you the best result because of how much water and paint it can have on it. I'm actually gonna mix up my colors first. Sorry guys, I'm going a little backwards here. I wanna mix up my colors because once we get this whole paper wet, we don't want it to dry on us. So let's mix up our colors. I already have my paints on here, the Cerulean Blue with that Blue Royal. I'm gonna mix that together. I'm going for kind of a light sunset wash today, but you can make it as saturated or as desaturated as you want. It's your choice. I'm just going to show you the basic technique. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I wanna mix up that, let's add some yellow on here. Yellow, and then this is Opera Rose right here, so I'm just gonna grab that. And we do want a little bit of the yellow just kind of by itself. And I'm gonna add a little bit of Indian Yellow that I have over here. And our pink, I'm just gonna keep it over here in this little well. Okay, now that we have our colors woken up, they have water on them, we can go ahead and start working with our paper. Typically what I do here is I would get clean water to do this, but since I want to do this quickly, I'm just going to use this water. So use the lightest color that you have. And as you can see, This is looking green because I just mixed this one and this one. So we don't really want green paper or watercolor. We don't want green showing up. You want your water to be as clear as possible, but I'm just gonna do this because I'm already getting started here. You need to wet your entire paper. All I'm doing is just grabbing some water and basically painting that water on my paper. This whole block is going to be wet. I recommend using the same stroke across. You don't want to start going everywhere because we want some uniformity even though it's just water. And you want your paper to be nice and wet, you guys. It should be shiny, but you should not see any puddles. If you see puddles, dry off your brush and come and just make a quick swoop like that, and it should take off some of those puddles. You want your paper to be wet, but you don't want it to be all puddly because then you're gonna get puddles of paint and it's not gonna look cute. I love to use these watercolor washes. I use them as backgrounds in some of my paintings if I didn't paint a background with the original. You could also paint on top of this with a darker color as well. Okay, so now that this is all wet, you should be able to see that your entire paper is wet. You can hold it up to the light. It's gonna be hard to see on the camera, but move it around a little bit. And now that it's wet and we don't have any puddles, remember, if you have puddles, dry off your brush and just do a swoop to pull up that water until you get those puddles up. We are going to go from blue sky to the yellow and pink down here. I'm gonna start with blue. And my paint is pretty watered down because I don't want it to be too saturated, but if you want it more saturated, go right ahead. And I'm just going to swoop across, and as you can see, it's really blending really nicely. Because it's wet, it's just automatically going to blend in. And we have to work fast. Also, depending on where you live, the weather might be dry. This might be drying really quickly, so you might have to work even faster. Or you might live somewhere that's really humid and you have more time than people living in the desert. So I'm just lightly brushing down until it starts to disappear. I'm gonna rinse off my brush and make sure it's nice and clean. And now I'm gonna pull water from the warm tones. And for that, I'm gonna start with yellow at the bottom. That's the kind of look that I wanna go with. And I'm just working from the bottom. Nice and yellow. And let's be mindful, if you wanted to put yellow here, you have to be very careful because you're gonna start getting green when these touch. So be mindful of that and leave a space. Now I'm gonna grab that pink and just lightly, I'm okay if the pink and the yellow touch because they're gonna make orange. And I can see I had some dried marks here. Sometimes my paint gets dirty. So I'm lightly bringing this up. I just wanna touch this area. I don't really want it to start turning purple, but I'm just lightly kind of fanning it out. And I can see that there's some water buildup on the side here. So I just dried off my brush and I'm lightly kind of, so light, you guys, lightly tapping it. And then if I want to make this line a little more blended, I have a brush that I've rinsed and dried off, and I am just ever so lightly like feather dusting the top of this. And literally that's it, you guys. It's so amazing. Now, if this is still wet and you decide you want to add some more saturation, you can do that. I'm gonna grab a little more of that blue, maybe darken it just a little bit with another blue that I have. And because this is wet, I can add in more. If this starts drying and I bring in this color, it's gonna pull up the paint that's already there and it's going to look not smooth. So you just, over time, you guys will get used to how fast the paper dries and controlling your water. There's really no substitute for practice, and you'll get that muscle memory and you'll know when it's going to get dry just from practicing. I might add a little more orange to the bottom here because it's still wet. Yeah, I like that. Maybe a little more yellow. And just bring it up light as a feather and go all the way across. I'm going all the way across every time because if you don't go all the way across, you're gonna get these little lines in the middle. And I'm gonna leave this now because it looks good. It's going to dry a little lighter. That always happens with watercolor paint. It's going to dry lighter than if you were using another kind of paint like acrylic. And you can see that it's very smooth. I'm looking and I do not have any puddles. If you're finding that you have a big puddle, you guys, make sure that you address that. So either drying off your brush and swooping up that paint with the brush. You could also use a paper towel, but when you use a paper towel, it is going to pull up some of the paint. So you'll probably get some little spots that you don't want. If you want it to be really smooth, my recommendation is first working with a watercolor block and then just being really good about your strokes. This will take time to get it to be perfect because you're not perfect, but you're getting used to working with water and watercolor paint. But this is just a great way to make washes, and you can use these washes for anything. Like I said, I use them as the backgrounds of some of my paintings where I don't paint backgrounds in. I've used these on invitation suites. I've used them, what else have I used them for? A lot of stuff, like they're great for backgrounds. You could do lettering over the top of them. They're really fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions about watercolor washes, please feel free to ask them in the comments, and I hope you have a great day.